Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. As many of you know, this is October, because you can read a calendar. For a lot of people, October is a very spoopy month. But if you're anything like me, the only monsters you like are the monsters from Monsters, Inc. You got your Sullys, you got your Mike Wazowskis, you've got your Rozes, and that's it. That's all you want. So this month, I have for you 8 recommendations on non-spooky books. So let's get into it. So I have two types of recommendations that I'm going to go through tonight for you. One, you're like me, you don't like horror. I get nightmares super easily. I will not sleep for days, and if I have one nightmare, I'm going to have it over and over and over again. So I hate horror, but I love suspense. And coming from somebody with anxiety, that's saying a lot. So I have 4 books that I would recommend for an atmospheric, suspenseful, almost thriller, but not quite thriller. You want a little bit of that edge, but you don't want to go too far with it. So, my first book to recommend to you is The Shadow of the Wind. And I just realized with this lighting you might not be able to see anything. This is The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. I love this book. I read this book a few years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago now, and it instantly became one of my all-time favorites. I give this a 5-star, and sorry, my cat's getting into the candle. I don't want her burning her whiskers off. I truly loved this book. I thought the imagery in it was just stunning. The Gothic descriptions of Barcelona in the post-war period was just immaculate. It gives you Gothic without making you sit through 30 pages of descriptions of a city's skyline. I'm looking at you, Victor Hugo. This work is just, to me, masterful. And the premise is there is a young boy whose father owns a bookstore, which we love to see. And one night, his father takes him to a very mysterious place down into the depths of this enormous building, into this absolute labyrinth, and it's books, and it's only one of any book. This is the cemetery of forgotten books. So the keeper tells him he can pick one book to take with him. It is his solemn duty to protect that book. So the boy picks the book The Shadow of the Wind by Julian Carax, and he becomes its protector and its keeper. And when he reads the book, he is totally enamored with it, and he wants to get everything that this author has ever written. And so he starts a very innocent search, being the son of a bookseller, to try to find this author and more works from him. And then he realizes there are no more works from him. There are no copies of any of his books. And that seems incredibly intentional. There seems to be someone or some entity finding and destroying every copy of this author's works. And so as far as Daniel knows, he has the last remaining copy of Julian Carax's works. And so he then begins this spine-tingling journey to figure out what is going on. Why are these works being destroyed? Who's doing it? What about the author? Where is he? Is he still alive? Nobody seems to know. So this takes you through a 1945 Barcelona immediately after the war, and everybody is trying to piece their lives back together. The city still has the scars of war. It's incredibly Gothic. It is incredibly atmospheric. It's like you should be reading this on a foggy London night on a bench on the Thames with just the street lights lighting the way, and you can only see about 5 feet in front of you. It's never intensely scary. There's no horror elements to this, but it is intriguing. It is Gothic, it is suspenseful, and it is full of so much atmosphere. I cannot recommend enough The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. Now, if you're looking for just a bit more than The Shadow of the Wind, I would have to probably recommend The Angel's Game by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. So the thing about The Angel's Game is that it is a sequel, but also a prequel. So these two books are actually part of a series, and I have read every book in this series, and they're all pretty incredible. Shadow of the Wind is by far my favorite, and it is the first in the series. And I believe it's called... All of the books focus on different characters, but they're all tied together, and as the series goes on, they all kind of intertwine and culminate. And The Angel's Game is actually set well before The Shadow of the Wind happens, and it is the story of an author, David Martin, who rents a villa to write one of his works, and there is something very, very strange about the place that he goes to live. The staff will not stay there. The place is crumbling into ruin, and suddenly a mysterious man approaches him and offers him a bargain. And then the rest of the novel is finding out, did he just make a deal with the devil? Who is this person and what is going on? Again, it's another gothic tale. It is very unsettling, is the word that I will use. It is very unsettling. It leaves you with a lot of questions every time you put the book down. You are following a very unreliable narrator, and it gets more unreliable as time goes on. And you're not sure if he's descending into madness. You're not sure if what's happening around him is real. This is probably the limit of where I would want to go with creepy factor. Like I said, I don't like horror. I don't like gore. I don't like excessive murder and violence. And I don't like supernatural terror elements. So this kind of borders as far as I would want to get into when it comes to those things. It gives you atmosphere. It gives you those unsettling, those suspenseful building storylines. If you finish Shadow of the Wind and you want to keep going, you have to pick up Angel's Game because it ties in so very importantly to the overall story of the Sempere family. So that is The Angel's Game by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. The next book on the list that I would recommend to you if you're looking for something atmospheric, something a little creepy, something a little with the unexplained, but not too much, not over the top, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I love this book. Another 5-star read of mine. The story is an absolute classic. His work is obviously absolutely a classic. There's a black and white film, and I don't remember any of the actors in it, except Angela Lansbury is in it. Very young Angela Lansbury. She's absolutely wonderful. I want to say Basil Rathbone's in it, but I really don't think he is. I'll Google it, but I don't think he is. But anyway, The Picture of Dorian Gray tells the story of a very young man, Dorian Gray, who, through some shady circumstances, is offered a deal in which he will not age, but instead a surrogate object will age for him. But not only will it age for him, it will hold the visible representation of every vile act that goes through this man's life. It is absolutely beautifully written. It is an incredibly unique and interesting story, and the description of this painting, this picture of him that ages instead of him, and that visibly reflects the debauchery and the hedonistic lifestyle into even the evil. It is unsettling, but it is so beautiful at the same time. So I would highly recommend, if you have not read this, even if you're not that big on classics, please check out Oscar Wilde with this work in particular. I have a hard time believing that there are going to be people out there who can read this and not enjoy it, not at least get a 3.5 stars out of this. So The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde is my third recommendation. And finally, my last recommendation for this series of books, Gaston Leroux's The Phantom of the Opera. What better way to take on atmosphere and suspense than the ghost that haunts the Paris Opera House. This is a tale of murder. This is a tale of mystery. This is a tale of greed. This is a tale of the underdogs of society, those who are disabled, those who are deformed, and those who don't fit in polite society, and how they end up having to live in the belly of the opera house and the ghost that sort of reigns supreme among them. This is incredible. I've watched the film version. I've never actually seen the Broadway musical version, but everybody kind of knows the story. This is the first time I read this book was this year, and this particular copy is really cool because it has a QR code. And so when you take your phone and you do the QR code, the cover comes to life. You hear the phantoms laughing, the mask moves, the chandelier falls. It is incredibly atmospheric. Rory. It is incredibly atmospheric and cool. And the coolest part is that in this copy by Augmented Classics, the foreword is written by YouTuber Emmy, who actually was the booktuber that got me back into reading after well over a decade of being in a reading slump. And so, of course, when I decided to read this book, this being her favorite book of all time, having written the foreword for it, I had to pick up this Augmented Reality Classics version. So, The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux, read it. It is a noir detective gothic story set in a Paris opera house. I mean, what more could you ask for? All right, so now let's turn a little bit more to the lighter side. Let's say October and the spoopy season is absolutely not your bag. You're pretty much more like me. Even the creepy, spooky stuff that I do have, which is so incredibly mild, I do not like reading at night. I do not like reading when it's creepy in the time frame. So like all of October, when you're just being flooded with creepy images, creepy movies, creepy commercials. I want something light. I want something comforting. I want something that is going to keep my mood elevated instead of tear me down into the depths of despair. So I have 4 recommendations for you if you're looking for something to keep you afloat. And I'm going to start with Dante's Inferno. What better way to keep afloat than to go into the depths of hell? But in all honesty, this is absolutely hysterical. Dante is so incredibly funny. I did not expect. I understand that it says the Divine Comedy and it would therefore be comedic. I did not expect a 14th century author to be this funny, that his humor would be this relevant. And the tabs that you see are things that I actually laughed out loud at. I don't usually laugh out loud at books, so I was shocked that this was that funny. So if you want to turn spookiness on its head, and instead of the really intense, terrifying, creepy depictions of, you know, angels and demons and hell and the underworld, honestly, check out Inferno. Everything is made a mockery of, and he does it so incredibly well. He never lingers too long in one area or on one person's dialogue. He has really good pacing to get through the, is it 9 circles? 7, 9, whatever. You get to the bottom and there's Lucifer, right? I have not yet read Purgatory and Paradise out of this, but I cannot wait to get to them. So if you are looking for the absolute opposite of spooky, Dante's Inferno. Next, I have Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. Now bear with me, because this feels like a weird one. You know how a lot of YouTubers will come up with their fall reads, their autumnal reads, the cozy books for fall. Somehow to me, this would fall into that category, which is really strange because the story, and you can see it's quite short, the story is of an old man and he's a fisherman, and the entire book basically takes place over the course of one fishing trip where he is fighting a monster fish and he wants to catch this fish. It means his life. And that is literally the entire book. And that sounds really boring. And it's Hemingway. And I have a complicated relationship with Hemingway, which I will get into in other videos where I read other things. But I absolutely loved this book. It is heartwarming and it is charming. It is such a real person that you're following in this, and you come to understand his motivations, why he can't give up, and why he's so driven to get this last catch. In a very small way, it's kind of a little bit of Captain Ahab and his white whale, but this was such a rich story in so few pages. I think that this is my favorite work from Ernest Hemingway. So for what is in essence quite a sad little story about an old man all by himself with one last catch, it's also a reflection on the beauty and the simplicity of a life working with your hands and earning your own way. And it's always a book that when I need something to kind of sink into, this is always one of the ones that jumps to mind. So if you haven't read it yet, it is very small. It's not going to take you any time at all to get through it, but I highly encourage you to read Old Man in the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. My next book that I have is Honolulu by Alan Brennert. It is the story of a girl in Korea who is named by her parents Regret. She decides to make a change in her life. Instead of being arranged into some marriage that she knows she's never going to be happy with, she decides to become a picture bride. She goes to Hawaii and she thinks she is going to have romantic life in this paradise island, but it is absolutely nothing like that when she gets there. Her husband is immediately abusive. This life that she chose might even be worse than the one that she left behind in Korea. In post-World War II Hawaii, she decides to strike out on her own and make her own way in life, which is absolutely not common for women of the time, and it was absolutely not common for Korean women, married Korean women at the time. And so the novel, and then these aren't spoilers because this all happens in the first few chapters of the book. The rest of the novel is following her throughout her entire life in Hawaii. She makes friends with the other picture brides that she met when they came over on the boat to the island. The story of their bond throughout the years, their sisterhood, and how their different paths kept diverging and then re-merging with each other. I don't usually like stories that follow an entire person's, like an entire lifespan. I like usually well-plotted books. There's something, a bigger focus than just, hey, this person was born and then this is their entire life to the point that they died. This book was so, I don't know how else to say, it was so cozy. It was so heartwarming. It was so raw in parts, but never simply for shock value. It was everything that she went through, every trial that she went through, every abuse that she suffered added so much to her story, and the strength of her will that was so human. Instead of going by the name Regret, she ended up choosing for herself the name Jin, which means gem. This is an absolute gem of a book. I highly recommend you read it. And even though it's set in Hawaii, I would not consider this necessarily a summer read. It's not particularly summery. I would say either spring or fall are the two seasons that I really feel are evoked from this book, but the overall feel of the book is just, it's either the blooming into new life of spring or the cozy warmth of a crisp fall day with a blanket wrapped around yourself. So check out Honolulu by Alan Brennert. What you doing? Do you want to be in my video? You always want to be in my video. And the final book that I have to recommend for you is The Street of a Thousand Blossoms by Gail Tsukiyama. This follows the story of two orphaned boys. Their parents are killed, and so they're taken in by their grandparents, and they are both wildly different but very, very close with each other. And it follows their lives from childhood well into adulthood, and it shows how their two paths diverge. The one shows promise as a possible world-renowned sumo wrestler, while the other is fascinated by the artistry of crafting no masks for the theater. They're each incredibly talented in their own ways, and it looks at first like they might both find a happy life in the things that they're passionate about. But war comes to Japan, and all of their lives have to be put on hold, and their entire world changes. I thought this was a beautiful description of what happens to an ordinary life when a war that you have nothing to do with and you want nothing to do with lands on your doorstep. It talks about how not only the two brothers, but their grandparents and their family and friends all have to adjust and survive and just keep moving, keep putting one foot in front of the other. So while this deals with a lot of difficult themes, it does it in such a beautiful way. Every single character in here feels so real. I really, really enjoyed this, and it is another cozy type of heartwarming book, and it is definitely one of my favorites. So if this sounds like it's something that would be up your alley, then please check out The Street of a Thousand Blossoms by Gail Tsukiyama. Leave a comment down below if any of the books that I've mentioned tonight are interesting to you, and if you have any suggestions for atmospheric, fun, cozy, non-spooky books, leave those down in the comments below too. I'm always looking for something to keep me off the edge of my seat for the month of October instead of being terrified out of my mind. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next one.